healthcare industry is going to change dramatically in the next couple of years.
To chronic disease management and the preventative aspect of care.
AI can now understand the key clinical concepts of what's being verbalized in healthcare.
Welcome to Leaders in Healthcare. I'm Dr. Jordan Vollrath, physician, entrepreneur, and Chief Medical Officer for Cherry Health. We're talking about all things healthcare. Join us as we speak to innovators, industry leaders, and the people working to drive the healthcare system forward. All right, today we're talking to Dr. Noah Crampton. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you again, sir. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Jordan.
So anybody who missed the previous episode, we've discussed AI, the nuts and bolts of how these systems work in our medical and healthcare context. Check it out, episode 28. But to catch you up, Dr. Crampton, he's a family physician, researcher at Toronto Western Family Health Team, part of the University Health Network, and he completed his master's in health informatics at the U of T. He's currently the CEO of Toronto-based AI tech company Mutuo Health, and his company is commercializing AutoScribe, state-of-the-art AI medical scribe tool employed in, at this point, a ton of settings across Canada. Today, we're talking about trust in AI in healthcare. So, to you, what does trust mean? Like in my mind, I think privacy, security, medical, legal, ramifications. If there's, let's say, God forbid, a lawsuit, and then there's an entire transcript of my patient encounter, whether that would look favorably upon me as the practitioner or not. And sort of when I think of trust, I think of, all those questions that are going to be going through a person's head when they're thinking about how to actually utilize AI in their workflow. What does trust mean to you, on the other end of the table as the innovator?
Yeah, exactly. It's a critical sort of abstract concept that is hard to pin down. When you're thinking of the specific, use case that we're talking about right now, which is obviously the relation between the healthcare sector, which is publicly funded, and the core values of physicians and healthcare leaders, which is irrespective of ability to pay and anything related to financial means. We treat each patient, for who they are, as the individual that they are, and we don't discriminate between means, right? So trust means, in this context, can a vendor who has that, financial motive adequately, provide this product or service in that context without, ulterior motives that may harm my patients or worsen certain components of inequity that exist already in society. And how you do that, you sort of try as much as you can to replicate, the way institutions in general have built trust, as you said, privacy, security, legal, all that stuff that has been rigorously implemented with, the right processes and guardrails and detailed verification, abilities for things that maybe individual frontline docs don't have the ability to do, but they as an organization where they work have employed the ability to vet that whoever they're working with externally meets those criteria. But I actually think it's important to realize the moment that we're in, which is AI. We're just, again, still at the infancy of AI. It's going to be so transformative once it's up and running at its pinnacle abilities, that we can't rely on old, sort of more antiquated ways of ensuring a partner is trusted, because it's not going to be like a one-time, big review, rubber stamp, and then we're okay. This is going to be a continuous process of ensuring that there's a robustness to the trust that's being offered, the integrity of the individual organization. is at play, because AI is a continuously learning algorithm. It's just a very different approach. And how do we build trust verification in an ongoing, indefinite way? It's a really interesting thought experiment.
Well, it's a good point, right? Because it's just a snapshot in time. So even if there is some sort of checkbox exercise or security audits to go through, right, that definitely doesn't kind of preclude you from doing anything going forwards in this department. I mean, when it comes to the concept of trust with AI, are the incentives not aligned as is 100%? Like from our perspective with Cherry Health, like if we had a privacy breach or a leak, or numerous examples of this happening in healthcare recently, from like provincial entities and government organizations, and the number of times I've been offered a free subscription to Equifax for 12 months to make sure my identity is not getting stolen because some branch of whatever has lost my name and my info. Like, to me, as like a younger company at Cherry Health, like if we have a privacy breach like that, like we're vaporized, like poof, game over, like that's it, right? And so when it comes to the same thing on the AI side, I'm assuming you guys are on that same page of like, okay, this basically is the entire business model, is making sure that we keep everything top notch.
Oh, for sure, right? So you compare our, so as a startup, we have limited resources, right? But you compare us as a digital health startup, where that is so primordial, so foundational to even getting in the door of the marketplace, that are, even though we have limited resources, our percent resource allocation of those limited resources is very high on ensuring that we are meeting privacy, security, legal, etc., like sort of minimum requirements. That's the first step of how we got into the market, is we at least surpassed the minimum requirements, which is a very high bar, right? So it's a very high percentage of our resources were to surpass that bar. But as you said, it's like once you surpass that bar at like a one-time verification, it's not enough. There's always new, bad actors. If you think of the ultimate, problematic case, people could look at like what's going to happen when quantum fully comes on board. That's going to just completely blow up every encryption, based technology. So we're always having to reinvest, resecuritize, but also, show demonstrably how we're doing that, with the data that we're collecting, and like why we're doing it, right? Because it's really the why that's important, to be in line with where the rest of the marketplace is, because that's just how Western capitalism is set up. There's competitors all the time, and you want to innovate as much as you can, in a rapid and effective way, but you also need to still adhere to the principles of ensuring those guardrail processes are always adhered to. Because if you're not, you're immediately, like you said, going to be you risk yourself of being vaporized at any one moment.
This show is brought to you by Cherry Health, Canada's medical network where healthcare practitioners connect. Physicians, pharmacists, nurses, chiropractors, and all other healthcare professionals can sign up for free, start connecting, messaging with colleagues, or checking out job opportunities posted by thousands of employers across Canada. With dozens of healthcare-specific job filters and search options, we make it easy to advance your career, find your dream job, or line up your next locum with hundreds of new jobs posted every week. www.cherry.health to get connected today. Yeah, that would not be great. Well, what is even on the line here? What kind of data are we talking about that, ideally is used for innovation and, pushing the envelope, making tools more useful, like as opposed to just waiting for the base model, Microsoft's Llama 2 to get its next upgrade to Llama 3? Like, what are AI scribe tools doing in the interim?
Yes, there's different philosophies of how to approach this, right? Which is why it's so critical to elevate the conversation, about whether or not in general to ingest data in an ongoing way, or just to, like you said, like take the base model and just wrap around an application on it and just launch. The issue with just doing that is certainly it's going to be accurate. Like, we're not saying that LLMs are very accurate right now, but the human condition is not like a static thing. Here's an example. Large language models that were trained before COVID didn't know what COVID was. Like, it's like it was a completely not, just like it was for humans, it was a completely novel thing. And these things keep happening in healthcare, where, whether it's a unique illness that appears or like a unique combination of pathologies in a particular patient, there's always novelty. And are we just going to be at the behest of big tech whenever they come up with a new large language model that, like, at their point in time, they are training their models? I mean, it's like, essentially, you fast forward into the future, what does that look like? You're just essentially dealing with these big tech behemoths and what they want to get out of healthcare, which I can promise you is not always in line with with the values of healthcare either, right? Like, they are also profit motivated, and here, fiduciary duty to their shareholders, etc. So the how a company is built, it's designed, it's whether there's a social angle to that company and aligned with the broader values of a health system matters, so that we can build our own internal AI models on an ongoing basis. What I mean, always ingesting that novel data, that unique data to individual patients, and then obviously linking it between all the databases in healthcare, right? Like, different EMRs have different data, and external to healthcare. You think of, like, in the future, Fitbit trackers or whatever. If you integrate all that in a organization that it has that trust, that it's doing that integration properly, safely, and the AI outputs that come out of that are clearly to the benefit of patients and providers, then that's the company that's going to ultimately win the race, ideally, and not big tech.
Well, what is the current, I guess, regulatory framework? What are the laws around this right now? Like, I've talked to a few different companies, several companies on their AI scribes at this point, and I've got like numerous different answers of like, we just don't, we don't use any patient data. It's not followed up on. Some companies are, iterating with the corrections that people make to a note. So they'll see like, okay, well, they changed this and modified that, and so that's not patient health information, but they're able to learn from it. Like, what does the existing laws and that minimum bar, what does that actually allow for currently in terms of AI innovation? Like, again, you don't want to just converge on who can make the prettier user interface to access whatever the model of the day is from the big tech companies, and kind of hamstring that innovation. What is currently allowed?
So you have to realize that the regulatory environment, the legislation that is enabling the regulatory decision making, didn't account for AI algorithms to be continuously used in the wild, in the real, like, healthcare sector. Like, this is something that is the legislation. We think of PIPEDA at Canadian level. Each province, for instance, has their own PHI related legislation, PHI, personal health information related legislation. I'm in Ontario. It's PHIPAA here. They certainly accounted for sort of traditional software and programs where you developed a logic based algorithm. It's then frozen in time. You can then have it evaluated. There was the concept of software as a medical device, where if you started to actually do diagnostic and therapeutics, it would have to go through a very rigorous vetting process. Here in Canada, it's through Health Canada, or US, it's FDA, etc. Like, that's sort of the landscape of that existed, where all of a sudden AI came out, which AI is a continuously learning and therefore changing software. Like if you look at the actual algorithms under the hood of it, it's not static in time like how the existing regulations were previously designed for. So with that being said, it's like, the regulators are sort of like want to get the benefits of all these AI tools, but they're also playing catch up to think about how is this actually going to work in a post-market sense, right? Meaning like how do we continue to verify and ensure the safety, etc. All those guardrails are in place once these AI technologies are released into quote unquote the wild of the healthcare system. So for what we've decided is that we've actually offered both options. We have what's called AutoScribe Classic and AutoScribe Express because different organizations right now know that this is the landscape. They're sort of operating in a bit of a vacuum. Different organizations have different risk tolerances. So our AutoScribe Express is our like privacy maximized version where we don't learn from any of the data. We delete all their data. But we forego the benefits of some of the, learning from that data. The example I gave earlier about, a new illness that came up, we can't generate a note that accounts for something that comes out new in the news within the last month or something. Versus our AutoScribe Classic does retain the data. We de-identify it, obviously. We strip it of all the identifiers. But we're able to retrain a personalized AI model for that clinician. Different organizations are going with different versions of AutoScribe. What I'm hoping in this conversation is that we're just like putting it on the table that we shouldn't all just be forced into my version, the version of AutoScribe Express as a vendor, as a private enterprise participating in this market. Because it's too premature to say that that's where the market is going to land, because it's, we've got to educate clinicians and other, key personnel in the healthcare system, managers, about the benefits of continuously learning AI with vendors like ourselves that are socially minded. Because if we're regulated out from even being able to ingest that data, it's ultimately going to be big tech that's going to be the ones making decisions for healthcare. And I just think that's the wrong model.
I mean, it's an interesting conundrum, right? We have sort of these antiquated laws, right? And they're dealing with patient health information in sort of that classic context, right? It's either parked on your device or parked on the server of whatever software vendor you're using, or it's encrypted in those locations and then in flight encrypted between the two of them. But it sort of is this like binary state of it's here, it's there, or it's moving between the two spots. And then when you get to AI, now suddenly we have kind of like this living, changing, growing, learning, like it's evolving. Like it's not that static kind of traditional, like if you were, I don't know, wave my magic wand and you are now the Privacy Office of Canada Chief Commissioner, like what would the regulation look like in your book? How do you actually adapt those old school rules to account for the new era of AI that we're now in?
Yeah, and I think this, like, I'm glad you asked that question because I think it's worth like going through the different exercises of like what may occur, like if a privacy commissioner comes out with like a very low regulatory perspective, one that comes out with like a very high burden perspective, or the one that I prefer, which is like essentially co-design this with the existing businesses that are operating that have shown integrity to this point and continue to do so. So let's go through the first one, which is a regulator, a privacy commissioner says, "Oh yeah, like just continue doing what you're doing. We're not going to verify that the way you're using patient data is like not like you are using it in a way that you can do whatever you want with it. You can train brand new models. You can charge whatever you want for it. Like essentially, the Wild West that we're sort of living through right now keep going forever." In that model, which may occur in some other parts of the world, by the way, obviously is not good either, because there's going to be a bit of a race to the bottom of uh, trying to ultimately incentivize like patients to get into a healthcare organization where that data is being fed, because the data is so valuable, right? Like, this is extremely valuable data. You always want to be the highest performant, up to date AI predictor algorithm. That's who's going to win the day ultimately. Um, so so it's going to just lead to some very weird distortions in the healthcare system, where like the company that incentivizes patients to go to the clinic that shares that data, like it's going to make patients have that on their mind when they're just making decisions about their healthcare, which they should not. Should not happen at all, right? It should always just be like, we're going to go to the healthcare says it's going to give us the best quality care, right? Regardless um, of which private services are being used at that center.
Because
Uh,
nobody questions their doctor on what EMR they're using or things like that.
right. Yeah. Exactly. So, uh, um, but if you think of the flip side, the very high regulatory burden, again, like, this is important. Like, this is a global change that's happening with AI in healthcare. Um, to have viable digital health enterprise in a sector, like, you kind of want the regulatory burden in at least Western world countries to be relatively equivalent, because if not, a company that is originated in a very high regulatory burden location will already be hamstrung from being able to uh, operate in other jurisdictions, where those companies from those jurisdictions, it didn't like wasn't a factor, and they can continue to have the most performant AI models. So as a result, like, yes, it might be more safe. You're preventing PHI data from going into those AI scribes models, but at the same time, there you're increasing the likelihood that those enterprises will not succeed, and therefore it's just going to be ending up being a regulator to big tech ultimate discussion, right? Which is we're trying to avoid that scenario as well. Um, so finally, what I think is the right approach was the co-design with guardrails. Is like, I'm going to make the most money from my shareholders is if I get a long-term contract that is periodically renewed with individual healthcare organizations, or sometimes with government, right? How am I going to get that contract? Is by proving out that, yes, my AI is continuously learning, but I have the um, external verification um, infrastructure that an external auditor or external regulator can come in and periodically verify that the most up-to-date security, privacy, you know legal mechanisms are in place, to that trust is always there, right? That's where, like, it makes sense, because right now, as you said, it's like one point in time. Let's say Health Canada is one assessment, it's released into the wild, and then no one ever reviews it again, right? Versus the vendors like myself, I'm happy to allow reanalysis of how I'm implementing my AI algorithms that are learning, because I want to continue to build that trust with my customer to show that we're doing the right thing. But I need the data. Like, I need that data to continuously be ahead of the curve. Like, if you cut me off from that data completely, I will not succeed in the broader global marketplace.
How do you use that data in a respectful manner? Like anonymizing it, where do you draw the line, right? Because all the data is sort of, I don't know, I feel like it loses its utility, it loses its value the more piecemeal it gets, right? Just like if you take a patient, one visit, it's a snapshot in time, right? Versus the holistic picture of sort of the more data around a single person or a cluster of conditions, or you name it, the more you have there, the more valuable it gets. And so, like, if you have all this, you take the name out, for example, like some of my mental health counseling patients, right? I don't talk about their name or their birth date or their insurance number in the conversations, but like, could the government of Russia reverse engineer the conversation and all the context and otherwise figure out who they were personally based on just the details of the names and job that they have and people that they're talking to? How do you find that balance when it comes to like all the other parts of healthcare data and like test results and like the things that patients say or that you find during an examination? If you talk about a tattoo during your inspection of their back or things like that, like how do you respectfully use patient data in a manner that's not at risk of breaching or harming the patient then?
And this is exactly to the point of how co-design would be appropriate, right? Like that is a great example of how I'm not necessarily advocating that like I'm going to ingest this data continuously and like it has to be stored in our servers, as much as we would do internally, like de-identification and make sure that it would be very hard to reverse engineer it. I actually am a big advocate for what's called like federation of data and databases, which basically what that means is like splitting up data in a way that only like a encrypted master key could ever bring that data back together. Whatever it is, I just need access to the data. And if these very complex approaches to minimize the risk of reverse engineering occurs, has to be in place. That like we're open to co-designing that, because that is totally legitimate to ensure the safety of patients ultimately. But there should be some sort of communal key, whether it's like at a ministry of a government or at a patient representative body that like comes together, that allows industry access to the recombination of that data to train the AI model. Most of the time that data could be split, and then like one point in time, once a month we want to retrain the model, it comes back together. As soon as you're done retraining the model, it splits back apart. Like nothing's going to be a perfect situation compared to just not having access to the data at all. But there's got to be a way forward where the risks are minimized, but we still get the benefits of continuously learning AI.
What is the pot of gold at the end of that rainbow anyway? Like, obviously innovation and the system getting better. Like, I think a big part of why Canadian healthcare is in such a hole right now is because it's been so stagnant. Like, not a whole lot has changed. And, since I was going to the doctor when I was a kid versus when I am now a doctor, like it's pretty similar. You might be a little bit different of a computer system or different chart that goes on there, but when it comes to the actual flow through, the accessibility, I mean, it seems like things have gotten worse versus we're in this technological revolution of the world, and we're not benefiting from it. Like, obviously companies doing better, flourishing, the Canadian export market and like just the economy is a big part, and like getting technology across borders and out competing other companies elsewhere. Like, to the individual practitioner and to the individual patient, like, what are the benefits of this continuously learning AI? What does that actually look like?
Yeah, so it like essentially, so AI scribing is like really it's an administrative tool, right? It's for clinical documentation. It's for ensuring accuracy of reports, comprehensiveness of the notes, so that for the subsequent visits has more detail than what a clinician would just type out on their own. Like, these are some of the current benefits of AI scribing, right? An AI scribe that is sort of forced to just use the foundational model that it was trained on and then can't do anything with subsequent data means that it's the edits that a clinician makes to that it tends to often have PHI in it. Like people's names are in notes, right? You sort of stripping that out, and so therefore, like the accuracy of the algorithm may not improve. And that's just the current example, because AI Scribe is lower risk in general. But if you get into like you said, like the ultimate way to think about this is AI prediction, right? Personalized treatment recommendation algorithms for patients and their unique, health profile that they have. Their data, like in a true learning health system, that patient's data, like there might be one other person in that broad data set that has a very similar profile, and we could learn from the treatment algorithm that was employed for that patient, so that the AI, co-pilot, or however you want to call these, tools, would just inform the clinician at that time, this is what was the outcome for this patient with similar findings. If we That's what continuous learning AI allows. If we don't have that enabled in in a company that's trustworthy to do that properly, ultimately you're going to have it at the cohort level, which is like not personalized. You're going to like basically get it for very broad groups, essentially. And it's going to be, regulators trying to verify that was accurate in big tech. And like, that's just a less exciting future for what AI could ultimately do. You want patients to get the best treatment that they can for their unique set of parameters.
I mean, what's the capabilities currently? Like feeding into the model, let's say for AutoScribe, like context window wise, does it have the capacity to actually use all of a patient's previous information? Is that like currently possible in its output of like the new notes?
Yes. It's like just within a year and a half, the context window has gone from like a 5-page essay to like a 300-page book.
Do you need all that? I guess, or you like when it comes to the interoperability between systems, like provincial systems and the lab systems and individual EMRs, they've got kind of this like translation of specific codes and diagnoses mapped to different spots. Like, is it possible to use maybe a simplified version, kind of like the skeleton of the patient's existing health data, like some of those cross connection points, and feeding that in without needing like the entirety of the previous data?
Again, exactly, like an appropriate stepwise example that you just described of that co-design that I'm advocating for, right? Which is, let's go for the lower risk, but still leverages, you know, um, data that's more accessible, more streamlined in different, databases within the system, but it does integrate them and does have machine learning applied to them for prediction. Because if you keep them, you forego the benefits of that. Like that, there is benefits in what you just described. I was painting a picture of like what the ultimate could be, and maybe it's too quickly to just jump all the way there. But there is a stepwise co-design approach that's, we tackle the lower risk approaches one by one, and we learn from them, and we see what happens. And it's not going to be 100% secure. It might be 99.9% secure, but I think as a society, like we have a social contract with our healthcare system, which it's not delivering on right now. AI is a tool that, if we deployed appropriately with the right, participants at the table, we could certainly elevate the quality of care for a lot of our patients. And we just have to decide what kind of level of risk we're going to tolerate to get there.
It's a good question to ask, right? Because you've always got like the incumbent, right? And they're very risk averse, not particularly innovative. They just don't want to ruin a good thing because they're in the lead, right? So you can see the Canadian healthcare system just very conservative. Everything's getting funded as is. Things are grumbling along. It's not great. But then, of course, you've got like all the new innovations, all the things popping up on the periphery that have to approach old problems with that 10x thinking of, okay, how do we just completely rewrite our process and do this to an order of magnitude better than we did before? And it's like, I don't know, you just constantly hear about like the system is in a state of collapse, it's crumbling, like we're at rock bottom. But then you just think, like, does rock bottom have a basement, and is there like an L2 below that for Canadian healthcare? Like, at what point does kind of the health ministry start reconsidering the absolute fundamentals of how the whole system is currently operating or not operating?
Yeah, and I'll commend, for instance, like the Canadian legislation that just came out that's allowing interoperability of data. That is great. Like, that is a step in the right direction to enable that data to seamlessly go between different digital systems, break down those silos. That's like an easy step that the Americans, for instance, took like 3 years ago. So at least we're like not completely, falling behind. Um, But to your point, like, I'm in this again. People always ask me, "Why did you call the company Mutuo?" Like, what is that word? Like, nobody
Where did
like.
that come from?
Yeah,
I gotta know now.
people are like, barely pronounce it. But I called the company Mutuo because like I'm trying to like mission critical like announcement of what we are trying to do, which is reframe the thinking about, you put you as a clinician, we type our data in an electronic medical record right now, and we just think it's like like a paper file but digital. It just goes in there, it stays there, and nothing ever happens to that data. You're just using it for clinical operations, like to do your work. Versus now it's like, no, this data feeds into an AI algorithm, which then learns and can suggest and maybe suggest something that's more accurate than me as the doctor even. Like, it's a totally different mentality. Mutuo is mutual for in Italian, for like that mutual dynamic. It's like, you give us high quality data, our AI generates a more accurate output, therefore you're incentivized to put more high quality data, and it's like this positive mutual feedback loop that clinicians never had to think about before. What I'm saying about like this like whole conversation about like how do we get there in terms of the healthcare system overall, um, ultimately governments work on taxpayer dollars, right? Ta- Governments like successful businesses based in Canada, right? Like, you want companies operating in our healthcare system to thrive, to grow, eventually to go, global, and operate in foreign markets, because all those revenues will be charged accordingly with tax that will then fund the healthcare system, right? Um, if AI is going to deliver on its promise with the socially minded enterprises that should be leading that, then there has to be a middle ground between like an extreme regulatory environment and a low regulatory environment, one that allows the Canadian-based company to thrive, to deliver on the promise to patient care while also improving the quality of their AI models, and then that will allow the healthcare system to thrive better with more tax money.
Hey, what are patients saying in your conversations? Like, what is their viewpoint on this? At the end of the day, they're the ones that we're trying to protect.
This is exactly my point. It's like, there has to be this public dialogue of, not just speaking to um, clinicians or long-term managers of the healthcare system who are like so like stuck in the existing way of how things function, that it's so insurmountable to think of what could be a different way of functioning. um, when I speak to patients about it, they're like, yeah, I mean, like every other industry is doing exactly that. You know, they're allowing the AI algorithms to be learned from the data, right? Like, why can't healthcare do the same thing that's happening in the financial sector? They're both high risk sectors. So all to say is most patients get it if the right guardrails are in place, rather than a complete blanket ban.
How did healthcare get to be in this like very special on the pedestal position anyways? Because yeah, you're totally right. Like there's financial industries with billion-dollar deals going through and like trade secrets guarding all this vast wealth happening on Gmail. And then there's like me talking to Lucy about her hypertension pill and how we got to switch it to another one, which is just like, oh, that is absolute top secret. Like that cannot happen on just a text message or through Gmail or Hotmail. Like, how did we get to this point? I like feeling special. It's kind of nice. It strokes the ego being a physician in this kind of special, sacred part of the world. But like, how did we even get to this point in the first place with our fax machines and, you know, just all this antiquated kind of dogma?
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely like some key decision making where there was an intention in, legislation and regulatory, like, publications. And I think that the innate cautiousness of people who go into healthcare interpreted those that were provided at the most cautious level that could be possible. Because, like, just as you said earlier, privacy breach, not just for us, like even for large healthcare organizations, is very, very bad. So everything, that can be done to prevent that from happening motivates a lot of decision making. And I think I get it. Like it's a good reflex. It's but we've really limited our approach to innovation, especially in like healthcare in Canada, which is publicly financed, right? Like you can't raise the prices here in Canada to come up with an innovation budget, really, right? Like it's working in a different plane. Um, what what I would say is one of the things that has really been sort of like tried to avoid at all costs was direct patient consent for a lot of the operations of healthcare. And we're not getting patient consent to be like, we're using this EMR. Do you consent to us using this EMR, right? And it's just because it would just make it too, friction filled of a system if we had to do that. So they ended up like parsing the system into these very like siloed environments where there's very strong privacy and security guardrails around these very niche components. Um, I think I think now with the more advanced data sharing technologies that we have, I think that's just like a false reflex now. That's why the interoperability, legislation makes sense at this point, because the data in transit can be as safe and secure as data in storage. But like, let's take that to the next level, which is like allow private enterprise that is trying to like drive, innovative tools forward for optimal patient care to have access to that data to train their models. I mean, and just verify that that vendor's doing it appropriately. Like, it's if we reflex back to like, no, we're going to go back to like, preventing private enterprise from the benefits of that, then ultimately you're going to see benefits in AI happening in other jurisdictions where that isn't the case. And we'll be left dealing with big tech, basically.
So clearly we need some more guide rails here. Like it's kind of funny, how often do you find private enterprise kind of like praying for more legislation coming down the regulatory pipeline? But in terms of guiding, again, it's sort of this unventured, unexplored part of tech and healthcare meeting. Like we clearly need more framework here. Like When you're saying collaboratively design it, don't kind of bungle it like what happened in the EMR space and wind up with all these downstream problems and interoperability issues and innovation being stifled. Who would even be at the table for that conversation in terms of like existing government, existing healthcare? Like, who would even be qualified to come up with this regulatory framework to have it a productive conversation and guide the system forwards?
Yeah, so like there's a question of whether like Canada wants to lead on this or just like at least be following the Western world on it. Like in the EU, for instance, they've come out with um, a regulatory environment in general, not just for healthcare, but for all industries about how to appropriately deploy their AI algorithms and like what reports on an ongoing basis are required for them to be approved for the marketplace. That's just one example. The U.S. is going in a similar direction, probably a little less regulatory heavy. There's like reports out of the White House, etc. Canada, I think, can like we don't have to like. I think there are AI acts that are coming in the federal government, and there's going to be some components of that, which is fine. That sort of sets the bar for all industry. But then when we speak about healthcare specifically, um, that legislation is not going to give the level of trust and comfort to the key players at the table to enable data access by private enterprise to then say, okay, this is the framework now industry can appropriately access. This is going to be another layer that's industry specific that's going to be developed, that needs to be developed, I think. And so at the table, for sure, like industry groups representing AI companies operating in Canada, like Mutuo Health, among others. So that's one group. Another stakeholder would be government for sure, like ministries of health. Another would be privacy commissioners. Another would be software evaluators like Health Canada. You want to bring this together, and maybe by province they'll want to do it individually. Whatever it is, like blanket bans on data access, not the right path forward. Bring these tables together of all these important stakeholders. Yeah, it might take a long time. It might be like a ton of work, but everyone's going to benefit at the end of that journey. So you should just start it anyway.
Would it make sense to have the EMR vendors at the table with this? I don't know. I just really foresee them being working very closely with the AI companies as things go forward and as that patient chart starts to merge with the encounter itself.
Oh yeah. I'm just giving an example for AI scribe companies, but just in general, the key players in digital health, and obviously EMRs being the most key player, like important key players, they definitely have to be at the table. But they're similarly interested in the way an AI scribe company is motivated to get like this resolved. they also see the potential, both monetary value, but also like customer success value if they can, automate AI in their environment in a way that's generates revenue for them, but also optimizes like patient care without the risks involved. So everybody's aligned here. It's just what is the immediate reflex about how to set the bar, right?
I'm very curious to see how it plays out. Like I'm already seeing it at play right now. Like the patients who I use my AI scribe tool versus the patients who don't consent to using it. It's just vastly superior of a record. Like at the end, I look at my like manually written note and it's just kind of sad. And it's like, that's normal. Like 2 years ago, that's just par for the course. But then looking at just like how disadvantaged a patient is now at this point of like how much more information gets captured, how accurately it gets portrayed. It's like night and day comparing the two. You extrapolate that out on this AI trajectory that's enhancing all of our providers, I mean, I can only imagine when we get to the point where we're starting to use prediction and diagnostics and treatment recommendations from AI. Like, it's just going to be like a complete haves and have nots separation for the patients and people who are using these tools.
Well, if we really game this all out, like, just like we're not consenting for EMRs, my hope is is that the regulators will eventually agree that no, you don't need to consent patients to use these devices because they're part of the ongoing vetting of the appropriate audio capture of the visits, or whatever mechanism in place to generate that trust. Like I I'm I think if there is a cynical um, approach that the regulators are thinking that it's just, oh yeah, it's too late for the startups, it's all going to be big tech at the end. Fine, I get why you would just do a blanket ban and just see how big tech, figures it out with all the gazillions of dollars that they have. But otherwise, it's like, if you don't take that cynical approach, you think like, no, what, we can actually build a novel way of operating with private enterprise to get those benefits of AI, like then like you can paint a picture that's very, very optimistic. And you just got to take incremental steps to get there, right?
Well, I'm kind of running out of questions for you here. Dr. Noah Crampton, Mutuo Health, AutoScribe. Any final statements or thoughts?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jordan. Like, I think it's a pretty like heady conversation. It's a pretty complex discussion. Um, I think this venue is a good one to like really get into the weeds of it, which is, I appreciate you doing that. Um, I just want to like simply state that the you know the next 10 years in healthcare are going to be so transformative. It's going to look so different. To your point about like what AI can ultimately do, um, we just have to like be in the driver's seat of what kind of future we want, right? Um, the way I see it is, society could either just continue to go on its reflexes in the healthcare system, which is just like keep everything siloed, keep everything like not accessed by external vendors, and this interoperable process will help things a little bit, but the actual training of the AI will occur offshore. It'll occur in the low regulatory places, like the US is always going to be much lower regulatory than Canada. And so we'll just be dependent on their algorithms, and we'll always be like, uh, begging for it. Versus another vision of the future where an organic, system-specific AI, like an AI that's optimized for the Ontario healthcare system for specific specialties or whatever it is developed with the right industry players at the table who understand why they're interfering in the post-market analysis of how the data is being used to train AI. Um, that will allow trust, ultimately kind of bring it back to trust, to develop, and that's going to be a very valuable, you know, badge of honor to then go to other markets. Say, look what a trustworthy interplay between private enterprise and the public healthcare system was developed to make the most accurate AI models. I think that's the future we should choose, and I'm going to keep talking about it. So you're gonna see me a little bit more in the public sphere talking about it.
I fully agree with you. Just like having seen kind of at the early parts of it right now, how transformative it can be. I really do hope we go down, the creating fertile ground for these types of things to flourish and innovate. Because again, the system needs it. Like, things are not going too hot, and we need to like kind of reconsider from page one what we're doing. And so hopefully the regulatory framework does follow up with that, as opposed to salting the earth and squashing things from coming to fruition.
100%.
All right. Well, Dr. Crampton, always a pleasure. We'll have to have you back for a chat again, as soon as we get some more regulation coming down the line from the government here. But thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jordan.